Hey guys, Mr. Mitnick here for your final video of the week is the Emancipation Proclamation that was issued on January 1st of 1863. So, what is our big question and answer? How did the Emancipation Proclamation change the purpose of the Civil War? Well, the Emancipation Proclamation is going to change the purpose of the war from preserving the Union to outlawing slavery. So remember, guys, how I told you before that Lincoln's main motivation for fighting the war wasn't to end slavery. Even though he himself was an abolitionist and saw slavery as evil, his main goal was to preserve the Union. The Emancipation Proclamation is going to change that, change the war entirely as to why the Union's fighting it. So just to showcase this to you guys, I got a nice little chart here for you to showcase the population in the United States in the 1860s. So in the North, we have about 22 million people, right? Over 22 million people. In comparison to the American South, look at that. The total Southern population is only 9 million people. So overall, huge major gap in terms of population, right? And then in contrast, what we have here is the South has about 5 million free individuals, right? Well, as opposed to they have almost 4 million slaves. Well, why is this significant? Well, think about that. Almost half of the Southern population is slaves, right? Well, what could the North do that would then maybe sort of really harm the Southern population in a way to, impact them during the course of the war? Well, what is Lincoln going to do? He's going to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. So, following Antietam on the fall of 1862, Lincoln realized that to defeat the South, it was necessary to cripple their economy, right? So, already we're almost a year into the conflict, and we are a year into the conflict, and realizing, okay, this isn't going to be a short-winded thing. We got to do something to sort of, get back at them. Let's, maybe we should be following the Anaconda Plan like Winfield Scott originally suggested, and we're going to find the Union will be doing that. But first, Lincoln's going to be issuing this. Let's do this. So, majority of Northerners are now in favor of abolition, the removal of slavery. Obviously, they have already said this before, but this is really going to be something that they already believe in, right? So what is Lincoln going to do? Federally speaking, though, there was no law to outlaw slavery. So even beforehand, although majority of Northerners were in favor of abolition, most states had outlawed it themselves. There was no federal law to say, hey, slavery is outlawed. It didn't really exist. On the contrary, according to Dred Scott case, it said the exact opposite. It said it was permitted everywhere. So Lincoln will be giving this speech here. Let's go into more depth about what it calls for. So on January 1st, he made the speech. Lincoln did, of course. And what is it going to say? Well, it declared the freedom of all slaves. So it's going to declare the freedom of all slaves in the territory of the Confederacy that had not already been returned to Union control. So what does that mean? It means that any Confederacy-controlled land basically said all slaves were free in that territory. So Lincoln is, of course, going to be quoted here of saying, and this is from the Emancipation, "And by virtue of the power and for the purpose aforesaid, I do order and declare that all persons held as slaves within said designated states and part of states are henceforward shall be free." So he's saying any slave in Southern territory is free. And just keep in mind, he, of course, still wasn't saying that applied to the border states of Maryland and Delaware. They didn't count. They didn't apply to this. So the question is, though, you have to sort of think about, well, Mr. Mitnick, why is this such a big deal? Because the Confederacy broke away. They're considering themselves this own country, and they're fighting for their own independence to be away from the Union. Why would Lincoln's emancipation mean anything to them? Well, that's a great thing, because it didn't actually free any slaves, because obviously the Southerners weren't about to let their slaves go free. They had no intentions of doing that. Well, let's be mindful. It only pertained to slaves in the CSA-controlled land. As I said to you before, not border Union states. It didn't apply to those guys, only to the Confederacy. However, this is why it's so impactful. So as the Union is going to take control of Confederate land, as they push forward into Southern territory and Southern states, thousands of slaves were free each day, until all slaves, which is about 4 million of them, will be freed by July of 1865. That's why it's so substantial, is that as the Union's moving into the South, which they, of course, are going to have a little bit more to do because they're sort of losing the war at this point in time. I mean, yeah, they won Antietam, but they, of course, allowed the Southerners to now regroup once again because of McClellan's failures. But ultimately, as the Union will sort of, get an advantage of the war later down the line, they're going to free slaves wherever they go in the South. That's why it's very substantial. So the effects of the proclamation, let's take a look. So it changed the purpose of the war from preserving the Union to freeing slaves. Very important there. Emancipation reduced the likelihood that Europe would ally with the South because, keep in mind, like I told you before, there was no federal law that outlawed slavery. And now this completely is, showing the differentiation between the North and the South, in terms of law, which now the Europeans see, wow, the Union is really against slavery. That maybe we might want to help them instead. The Southerners, they are supporting this very immoral practice. They might give us cotton, but certainly we can continue to do, trade deals with the North if necessary. So this is going to hurt the Southern's chance of getting European allies. Part of the Southern strategy, of course, as I said to you, was, of course, getting those European allies, right? I mean, you think about, as I keep mentioning, the revolution, but I think it's important to make that connection. We won the revolution because of France. That's, a matter of fact. We know that, right? And this is what the South was hoping to rely on. And now, because of the emancipation that shows that the North is completely against slavery, it now shows that and the South, of course, is unwilling to sort of let their slaves go. They've now lost out on a big opportunity to have support from a foreigner. So it also allowed the Union to recruit African Americans for service in the military. This is really big because now they already have bigger population, and they can also have African Americans who would want to sort of fight for this purpose to free slaves in the South to take part in that. Now, with that, though, in mind, there, of course, is going to be major skepticism about this. I mean, even though a lot of Northerners were against slavery, that still didn't change the prejudice and racism a lot of them still felt towards African Americans during this time period. One great historical instance, though, is a man by the name of Robert Gould, who actually is going to establish the first African-American division who will fight in the Civil War. And there's a great film on him and his abilities or his efforts called Glory that stars Matthew Broderick. And also I think Morgan Freeman's in it and Denzel Washington, among many others. It's a really great film. I highly recommend it if you're interested in checking that out. So, our big question and answer for the emancipation, well, how did the Emancipation Proclamation change the purpose of the Civil War? Well, the Emancipation Proclamation changed the purpose of the war from preserving the Union to outlawing slavery. Now, this doesn't become a matter of bringing the Union back. It becomes a moral question. Why do we fight? The Union fights to get rid of slavery and put an end to it, much like a lot of Northerners were in support of it before. Now they're going to be able to see this come to fruition. All right, guys. So that is all I have for you for this week. Make sure you complete the Socrative. This is the last one you're going to have to do. And then I will see you for the next live learning. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.